Well, good morning, everybody. Welcome to another edition of CGS Live VFX special. I hope everybody's had a good week. And today we're going to keep going with the Rookies Effects Challenge shot. And I thought I might focus a little bit on lighting and rendering. But if anyone has any questions, then feel free to chime in. I apologize if my voice starts to go. I have a bit of a sore throat today, so I'll try my best, and maybe I won't speak as much today. But feel free to ask any questions as we go, and if you have any kind of effects questions about this shot as well, please feel free to chime in and ask, and I'm happy to kind of try and solve some of those problems for you too. So yeah, I'm going to jump into this shot again, and one of the things that I see a lot with effects work is that a lot of time is spent into the effects. Obviously, that's the most important part, but what tends to let things down is the quality of the lighting and rendering, and it's a big part that I think is often overlooked. So I'm going to spend a bit of time just talking about how I would set, this shot up. And this shot actually comes with lighting. I mean, this is the supplied Mantra file or Houdini file that has some lights and a default Mantra scene in there. Hey, morning, Abiyu. Abiyu, I think I got your name right. I'm not sure. Sorry if I got it wrong. Big scene. Yeah, that's great. It is a huge scene in terms of the amount of stuff. It's a really big environment. I don't know why there's so much of this mountain background here, because we really don't see it, but I guess you see it in some shots maybe. Robert says, "Doctor, I got the offer today." Yeah, that's great. Congratulations, Robert. Robert got an offer from Luma Pictures today, which is fantastic. It's great. That's what we want for all our students. So well done, Robert. You must be feeling very happy. Well, if you have any questions, Robert, feel free to chime in about this stuff. I'm gonna focus on lighting in Mantra today, but I think a lot of this stuff can be transferred to other rendering engines as well, and to Redshift. There's a little bit of kind of specific stuff that you need to worry about when you're working in Redshift versus Mantra, but it's all kind of the same techniques. It's just different nodes, different settings. It's a little bit more challenging in Redshift, I guess, just because it's not fully integrated. How long does it take to render for a single image? Well, I mean, that it's a good question, but it doesn't really take that long at the moment, because there's not a lot going on. If we render this, jump into Mantra here, we've got a preview Mantra node set up with very low pixel samples. So if I hit render on this, we should see something pretty quick. And it's only 1960 by 410 as well, so it's half res. And Mantra is all GPU, so it's a little bit slow, but this is rendering pretty quickly at the moment because of the low pixel samples, and there's not a lot going on. So have a look at that. Oh, look at that. He's floating in the ground there. There's a disconnect between the shadow and the hydralisk. There we go. So 28 seconds for incredibly low pixel samples. You can see it's quite noisy and grainy, and it's only half res. But for me, that's perfect for testing. But then, as I go up, maybe I want to go to like 4 pixel samples or something. Then you can see it's going to take a bit longer. It's giving me an ETA here of around 3 minutes versus 24 seconds. So considerably longer, especially if you factor in the timeline, that we've got 300, 400, 600 frames to render. So that is why, you can see that's cleaned up a lot. It's cleaned up that noise, but it's just too long to wait for when I'm doing testing, so I always set that down to 1 so I get a nice quick render. Now, this does have lights in it, but these are probably, you know, I find skylights give kind of muddy results because of the colors that come from this sky. So I tend to not use skylights. Basically every VFX scene they use a render farm. Well, I guess, you know, working at a studio, yes, you use a render farm, but not always. I mean, it depends what it is. Sometimes if I have something that's fast enough to render, and the render farm, you know, is full, I might just render it on my own machine in the background, do something else while I'm waiting. But yeah, I mean, in general, VFX studios use render farms to render things. Not necessarily because the thing is very slow to render, but just because it gets it done faster. You know, quite often the goal is to make your render as efficient as possible, not just to go, well, I've got this 8-hour render, I'll just throw it at the render farm and get it back whenever. For me, the goal is to always make a fast, efficient render so that I can get it and continue working and complete the shot as quickly as possible. So, yeah, I mean, in general, VFX studios use render farms, but, you know, if you're working and you've got something that's rendering really, really quickly, then you can render it on your own machine. Sometimes the time that it takes to send it to the render farm to have it picked up, if the render farm is particularly full and there's a queue, there's an order to when things get picked up on the render farm, you might not go back. You might not get back in an hour or more, so it might be faster for you to just render that on your own machine. There's, you know, things that you think about when you're setting all this stuff up, and just depends on the resources that you have available to you. So yeah, the lighting in this is very kind of just temp and default, and even the shaders, you know, they're very kind of basic. So I thought about doing a bit of work on the Hydralisk, but then I thought, you know, perhaps I'll spend a bit of time on the Cyborg guy, because I haven't really seen a lot of people work on the Cyborg's shaders. So if we have a look at the Cyborg, if I turn off the Hydralisk, and maybe I'll just turn off all of the environment as well, so that we just are focusing on him, you can actually see how that changed the lighting. So the ground there is actually affecting the illumination of that character. So I might turn those back on, and let me see, I'm going to go to my out context and create another mantra node. I'll just duplicate this preview, and we'll call this one Cyborg, and then under objects I'm going to put forced objects Cyborg, and then under forced phantom or matte, probably matte, I'm going to put the environment. So I think the rocket ground is not the one I want, but let's see. And then I should get, if I have a look at the Cyborg render, I should hopefully see that I get a pretty similar render for this guy. Shouldn't change, but the mountains should go away. There we go. So his lighting's the same now. But you can see if I get rid of those, that it actually changes his lighting. So it's important, especially when you have skylights and environment lights, that you have some sort of ground, because it will block the light from coming from underneath. So I'll just put them in the matte slot. That means they won't render. We get a nice clean alpha for him. And let's have a look at his object first, because they have done some material setup. Hey David, have I used Houdini for UE4 yet? No, I haven't. It's on my list of things to learn, but I have not touched it. It's not something that, that I have to do too much in my film work, but I can see the writing on the wall. You know, things are certainly changing in the industry, and it's definitely something that I want to take a look at. But yeah, I have not yet. But there's lots of resources out there. We're also talking about trying to include it in our courses at the moment, and looking at what that involves. But I'm just going to start doing some of the some of the free Epic content that's out there to try and learn as much as I can about integrating, you know, into Unreal. Have you used it at all, David? Oh, cool. You were able to use the gorilla saliva to do some draw for a cinematic. That's awesome. I'd love to see it. Please send it to me. I'm glad it was useful to you. Yeah, that's really cool. What was the cinematic for? What am I doing here? Let's see. So what I'm going to do is, Rizwan, you're making fire. What are you making fire in, Rizwan? In Houdini, I hope. So what I'm looking at here, I'm just clicking around randomly, but what I'm looking at is how they've set things up. So they've set up 3 materials, a body, an inside, and a wires. It's a Fortnite shot for Epic. Oh, cool. That's awesome, David. I look forward to seeing it. I love doing those drill effects. You know, they're a lot of fun. Especially when you get all dangly bits, and you know, it's great. It's a really useful kind of technique that I've been doing long before I was using Houdini as well. So it's yeah, it's a great kind of effects one to have. Are you doing fire and lightwave, Rizwan? How's that going? I don't know much about doing effects in lightwave. So yeah, that's right, David. I think the tricky thing is once you get a lot of movement in those simulations, it does become difficult, especially if you're trying to do fluids or stuff like that, like the fluid draw with a lot of crazy animation. Yeah, it is hard. It is really difficult. There are tricks that you can do to kind of stabilize things a little bit, and I could try and show you something like that yeah, at some point, you know, some sort of stabilization technique for, you know, when you have to add some sort of effect to a animated character or something that's moving around like crazy. But yeah, it's definitely challenging, but it's good practice. You know, it's good to find that out because yeah, it's definitely not as easy when something's moving around like crazy. The Kong one was pretty good because all he was doing was sort of just translating forwards in space. So that was a little bit easier. Okay, cool. Yeah, well, I'll see if I can do it on the Hydralisk. I'm not sure if I'll be able to. Let's just have a quick look at the rendering for this guy. Yeah, well, that's great. I'm glad that you yeah, were able to get something out of the stream. So that's awesome to hear. So what I'm going to do is just put down some blasts, and I'm going to grab the path that they have already put in these materials and just have a look at what these geometries are. Let me just stop the rendering and check out the scene view, and I'll just paste that path in there. Hit delete non-selected. Okay, so there's our armor, and if we have a look at the UVs, we've got UVs, which is great, because I'm thinking I might do a texture on these. Oh, Rizwan says, I modeled my land speeder and now I'm making fire come out of the engines. Oh, cool, like a jet flame, Rizwan. That sounds good. Oh, Alistair says there's an echo, and I just noticed that my video capture... Yeah, I hope that's better. Alistair, is that any better? Let me know. I just turned something down that appeared for some reason in my OBS. Okay, so I'm going to copy that blast there, and I'm going to grab this next path. Thanks, Alistair. Thanks for letting me know. And there's the second part, so that's the body. It looks a bit weird, but that's okay. And then let's put another blast down, and we're going to have a look at this one, the wires. Volume is a bit low. Oh, let me turn it up. Is that any better? I'm trying to keep my volume low because my keyboard is so noisy, but I'll try and talk a bit louder as well. Hopefully that helps. Thank you for the feedback though on my audio. That's very helpful. So here we go. We've got our 3 bits of geometry. We've got our outside. Yeah, great. Thank you. We've got our outside armor. We've got our inside sort of body, and then we've got these kind of wires. They call them wires, but you know, it's some sort of textural suit. And if we merge them all back together, we should get the same, you know, kind of complete character. Rizwan says making fire with particle simulation. Oh, okay. Yeah, well that's fine. You know, there's no need to always go for a fully simulated fluid simulation for fire, especially something like a jet fire. That is something that I've often done with geometry or, you know, something like that, and then converted it to look like a volume. So that's fine. Okay, so now we're going to look at each component separately. So this one, at the moment, if we have a look at the body, it has this material on it, and it's just a very plain kind of principled shader at the moment with a little bluish color. It's fully reflective, and that's kind of all they've done. They've just given you very basic materials to start with. So I went online just before, and I was looking at this website, 3dtextures.me, which sounds like a super dodgy website, but they actually have some really good tiling textures. And I downloaded this sci-fi armor texture, which I think looks pretty cool. I was trying to look for like a carbon fiber texture, but I couldn't find it. It didn't seem to have one. So I think I'll go with this. So I'll just open that up, and let's see if I can find it. Just give me 1 second. What's the website? It's called 3dtextures.me. I came across this not too long ago, and it seemed pretty cool. Just trying to find it now, the texture that I downloaded, but I can't see it. Maybe I'll have to download it again. Maybe it didn't work. So what you do is you go down to the download all the maps, and it takes you to a Google Drive, which again seems quite dodgy. But you know, so far I haven't had any ill effects. Maybe it failed actually. Maybe I cancelled it out of this zipping stage. But yeah, you know, they actually look really good, and they have a lot of components which are great. You know, ambient occlusion, height, normals, roughness. So they actually, you know, are a really good material to use because you can plug all those things into a principled shader. Okay, so here's my material now. I'll just copy this into a location that makes sense, and just give me 1 second. Sorry, just trying to copy this somewhere that relates to the shot. Okay, so we already established that we have UVs on this guy, so that's a good start. So if we have a look, here we go. We've got that's the body part there, and if we put a UV texture down just to check what those UVs are going to look like. Oops, sorry, not a UV texture, a UV quick shade. I just want to see that on there. So that looks good. And we could actually put one of the ones that we just downloaded down. So if I just put that path in there and then grab the base color there. So the base color is black. So I guess all the definition is being done by the other maps, the height map and the ambient occlusion map. And you can see actually the distribution of that texture is really large. So it doesn't look like that actually has any bearing on it. So what I'm going to do I could do it in here. I could do a UV transform like this. That would actually work, I think. So if I go UV quick shade and then have a look at my transform, you should be able to see that I can scale up or down the UVs. So you can see I get a nice then distribution of that texture instead of it being really, really large, now I've got these really nice small textures, and it starts to look a bit more like carbon fiber. Rizwan says, do you have a timeline in here? Yes, down the bottom here. This is how I see what frame I'm at. This is the timeline. I think that's what you mean. So this is the, I don't know what to call it, frame bar timeline, where you can hit play through here, you can slide around, you can set keyframes. That's pretty similar to most 3D packages. I assume Lightwave has something similar to that. There's a bit of stretching going on here. That's not great. Not great UVs, but I'm not going to worry about that. So let's go and have a look at this in the material. So we've got our UV transform, so we want that on there. And let's now put a material node down. Actually, I'll just use the same material, but I'll just modify that material, I think. So let's go and have a look at that material. Camera. Oh, I need that transform is important on the cyborg as well. So I'll just put that down here. There we go. Find a decent shot. Render. Yes, it does in Lightwave layout. Yeah, that's good. I think, timelines are obviously very important when you're working on animation. You want to be able to move around, and certainly with a shot like this, you want to be able to jump around to different parts so that you can work on the various aspects of the shot. So let's go to our body material, and just to make sure that that's working, I'll just turn that down. Yep, so that's good. So I think I'm going to go for a black sort of material. And then let's have a look at what components we have here. So we've got ambient occlusion, we've got height, we've got normal, and we've got roughness. So we can go to this texture panel and put in some of those materials. So we could choose in the roughness slot, we could put that roughness in and see what that does for our render. Hasn't changed a whole lot. Let's go to displacement and add textural displacement along normal texture path, and we'll add in the height there. There we go. So that's starting to do something, but let's just take that effect scale down. And it might be really hard to see at a low pixel sample, so I'll just up that pixel samples a little bit. And I guess you can kind of see it there. Let me go full res. It might be a bit clearer to see that texture. There we go. You can kind of see that a bit better now. Did I download these textures from the internet? Yeah, I did just show that, Rizwan. That website is called 3dtextures.me. That's where I grabbed that texture from. And it was not just the texture on the homepage. So I just scrolled down and I saw that and I thought that looked pretty cool. So there's tons on here. It's really good. I've found lots of really cool textures on there. So yeah, there we go. And it's, it has that kind of carbon fibery look to it. Let's just modify maybe the reflection. I'm just going to turn the reflection down. See what that looks like. Maybe just turn it off completely and see what that looks like. Okay, so it's very, very dark. Oh, here we go. There we go. It's kind of nice. I'm just going to turn it back up a little bit. Let's go 0.5. And the roughness, there we go. The roughness multiplier still works as a multiplier on top of this texture. So actually that looks better, having it be completely rough. I think that's looking really nice. So we also have in this texture, we have normal map and we have an ambient occlusion. So we could use the ambient occlusion for something. We could use that as a multiplier maybe. Let's just have a look at that, preview it, see if it'll come up. There we go. So it's got some interesting details in there. We could actually potentially just plug that into something else too. So plug it into reflectivity maybe and just see, see what that kind of does. I think probably because it's mostly white and only the black parts are in the cavities. Doesn't look like it's going to make too much of a difference. But it's good to try these things when you have all these maps just to see what happens. Now, one thing that I do sometimes do with ambient occlusion is use it to potentially as a mask for something. So I could just bring in a texture like this and put that ambient occlusion in there and then use it maybe as a mask for two colors, for example. So I could put down just a constant, just a constant, and set that to color. And just for the sake of being able to see what this is or what this does, I'm just going to make them two very obvious colors like red and green. Put a mix down and then mix those two together and use the ambient occlusion texture as the bias and plug it into base color. And let's see what happens. Hopefully something happens. We should see a mix of red and green. There we go. So you can see I've got red in the kind of cavities there, and I have green in the, for the main part. And you could swap those around. So it could go like that. And you can also, if I put a vec to float down so that I've turned this black and white texture effectively into just a single float channel, it becomes easy to deal with when I do things like fit. Because fitting a vector becomes a bit challenging. There's a lot of stuff that gets put in this dialog, so you can see that there. It becomes a little bit more challenging to see what's going on. But if you convert it to a float, if it's a black and white image, it's a lot easier, and you can then start to crush that image to produce a different result. So you can see, when I had that like that, it was actually kind of producing an orange, because I guess maybe the red and green are kind of mixing together a little bit. But by crushing it, I can sort of get that to be a little bit more, I guess, black and white, a little bit more of a either or mask. Now, I don't really want to do that for the base color. I think I was happy with the look of the base color, but I was thinking that it might be cool if I set this green. Let me make this blue, and I'll set this to black. I'm going to plug that into emission. So let's go down here and find emit color. And then, oops, I'm plugging that into the tongue, which shouldn't be. I should be plugging that into the body. So emit color. Here we go. And then let's just go to the surface tab and make sure emission intensity is on. It's on 1. There we go. So now we've got some like glowing texture, which is kind of cool. It's a little bit too intense, but it's an interesting kind of effect that you can get with this stuff. So it's really handy, even if you don't necessarily need to use the ambient occlusion. It is kind of handy to have it there if you wanted to do any interesting masking. Now that to me is a little bit too full on and weird, so I'm probably just not going to use that. But just to kind of show you, the possibilities with that stuff. Maybe we'll use the base color, and I'll just do a kind of black, and for the cavities I'll just make it maybe a lighter grey instead, just so they stand out a little bit. Even having a little bit of blue in there isn't a bad idea. There we go. It just gives us a little bit of separation there. Maybe a little bit darker. Yeah, okay, that'll do. All right, so I'm mostly happy with that. I think that's not too bad. It's an improvement on, what we had originally, which was just a very plain kind of material. Let's go and have a look at what else we've got. So we've got let me just pause that for a second. We've got the body, and we've got these kind of wires. So I think for the body, what I'm going to do is put a different material on here. I'm going to go put a material on, go to my material context, and just create a, let's just create a principled shader. This one, I'm going to set emission to blue, and I'm just going to call this one like body glow. and then apply that here, slash matte, slash body glow. Let's have a look at that. So we don't really see a lot of this body, but it does peek out in a few different places, and also from behind these wire geometries. So what I'm hoping is that this will be a kind of internal glowing that comes through. And it won't be as intense as what this one was, but it might just, it might just help to create some really interesting internal glowing effects. There we go. So that looks pretty cool. And it's not so full on as this one, but it just gives you that little hint of glowing effect in the knuckles as well. And that's something that you could then in comp add a glow to. You could also, potentially do some kind of effect coming from this glowing stuff if you wanted to. But I think just keeping those glowing effects subtle is a nice thing. Just a little bit of it is good to see. Okay, and now finally, let's have a look at the what they call wires. So they had applied this material, matte wires. Let's just have a look at that. And again, that is just a plain kind of material with a red color on it. I'm going to make a classic shader now. So I'm going to do some subsurface stuff, and I find that the principled shader is actually quite difficult to dial in subsurface effects with. So I'm going to use the classic shader. So I'm going to call this one wires classic, and go and apply that to my wires here. So material, whoops, slash matte slash classic, wires classic. There we go. And let's see, hopefully we'll see something here. There we go, so it started to change. Now let's go and have a look at this one. So I'm going to turn off the reflections for a second, enable subsurface scattering, and I'm going to do single scattering. And let's just put the scatter distance down. Okay, so you can also turn on reduce diffuse intensity. So what the subsurface does is it tends to multiply down the diffuse intensity when you turn on subsurface scattering, which creates the kind of subsurface look that we usually want. But sometimes it reduces it too much to the point that it looks overly dark. So I find, depending on the effect that you're going for, I find that it is sometimes good to turn that off. I'm not entirely sure if we're going to get subsurface from this emission by default. I think what we might need to do is actually create a geometry light. So I'm going to just create a null here, and I'm going to, let's see, I'm going to blast out just the body again from down here like that. Hopefully that works. There we go. Blue glowing man, nice. Out. Blue man. Set my view flag back here because I don't want to render that. And then I'm going to create a light, and it's going to be a geometry light, and the path under area light options, geometry object, is going to be the cyborg. And I don't know if this works, choosing a null like this inside the object, but we'll see. So there it is showing up there. If I hide the cyborg, you can see there's our geometry light. It looks like it has grabbed the null, which is cool. The material can be slash matte slash which one was that? Let me just check. Can't remember the name of it. Body glow. Just copy that path. So we can put that on there. In fact, it's probably not too necessary to put that on there because we could just set the blue color there. But anyway, we'll put it on there. All right, so let's see what happens now with this H light on there. So I'll call this body light glow. And let's see if if anything good happens. Might be a bit weird. One thing that potentially could happen is because the cyborg and the light lay in the same place, so they kind of exist in the same plane, is that they might cancel each other out, so we need to exclude one from shadows. But we'll just see. We'll see if anything happens. I'm seeing some light coming through. Let's crank it up. Intensity 10. Hey, there we go. So that's kind of cool. It's actually coming through the armor, which is interesting. I'm not even really sure why. Because I didn't think that armor was transparent, but I kind of like it. You know, sometimes you get these happy accidents with lighting and shading that you know, maybe I won't question it, because I quite like that look. I think it looks really kind of cool. It's better than what I was trying to do before with the ambient occlusion blending. Yeah, I don't know what's going on there. It's weird. I mean, I can exclude things from this light as well. So I find that the easiest way to do that is through the light linker. So if you go to new pane tab type, mantra rendering, light linker, I can just choose this body light and then choose the thing that it's going to affect. And perhaps it would be better if I split my cyborg out now into separate objects so that I can actually exclude certain parts of the cyborg from lights. So I might just duplicate. In fact, I can just duplicate this whole thing. It's not a terribly complicated network. So I'm just going to stop that for a second. And I'm going to call this one cyborg body, and this one cyborg wires. And then in here, I'll just disconnect the things that I don't want to come through. So that's the wires. Here's the body. And here's just the armor. There we go. Okay, so now I've got everything back. And now through the light linker, I can exclude the things that I don't want to render. So I only really want to render the wires with the light glow. So now we'll see that we shouldn't get any illumination coming on the on armor. Hopefully, I don't know. We'll wait and see. It's all very quiet in the chat. Hope everybody's still there. So here we go. Now we can see, well, it's not actually doing anything now, which is interesting. But we might need to go back to our out and add here. Good. Thanks, Robert. I'm not getting a tally today of whether people are here or not, so it's hard for me to tell whether I'm just talking to myself, but that's okay. I assume you were still there. Okay, so here we go, we're back. So let's have a look now at trying to get this to look a little better. So we've got our cyborg wires classic. Let me just set this to, I'll turn off subsurface and, oh right, thanks. Only 6. Oh well, can't win them all. There we go. So we've got some refraction happening, so that's working. I'll turn the intensity down so we can see that a bit clearer. There we go. So that's definitely something happening there. Let me turn that off again. Have a look at what it looks like with just diffuse. So I might need to just crank up the light a little bit. That's right. I'm just talking to myself, Alistair. I'm not even really here. It's just all a dream. That would be sad if I did Houdini in my dreams as well. Okay, so this is interesting. It's not really doesn't really look like it's casting light on the wires, which is not great. Let's just check cyborg wires. So there we go. There's the light mask for the. So this is what the light linker does. Basically, it just edits these shading masks. So you have a look at the body, and the body has everything except the body light glow, and the cyborg has everything except the body light glow as well. So that's what it's doing under the hood. But yeah, it's doesn't really seem to be casting much illumination onto these. Let's go back and turn on our subsurface and see if that makes any difference. There we go. So we're seeing some subsurface. We can crank up the intensity as well. See if that does anything. And let's have a look. Turn off diffuse, maybe that might make a difference. I might, on here as well, just take off that material. Maybe turn off self-shadowing as well, that might have a bearing. Just keep cranking this up. Let's see what we get. Can turn off shadows as well. See if that makes any difference. Yeah, it doesn't really seem to be making any difference. I don't know why. I wonder. Oh, you know what? I wonder if this is why. Because I changed this out blue man. Yeah. Ah, what a fool. Here we go. It's probably going to be just... No, nope, nothing. Okay. Oh, transform. Get that in there. What a mess I've made. I was trying to make it easier for myself, but it looks like I made it worse. Alright, so let's just go and check. So there's our armor. There's our wires. That's the wrong one again. There we go, blue man. Let's just... There we go. So there's our blue man in there. I'm getting some weird behavior from this Alembic file as well. You can see it's jumping around in time. I don't know if you guys have noticed this in Houdini, but sometimes with certain, especially Alembics, when you're doing certain things, they just seem to jump back or do some weird popping in the viewport, which is it's really annoying. It's just time-based stuff, and just turning things on and off seems to help it. But yeah, it's incredibly frustrating seeing it jump around like that, but it's not really there. It should be over here. Okay, so now I think this should work. That's probably going to be super duper bright because I cranked it up a lot. Wait for it. You get limbs reversed too. Wow, I haven't seen that. I haven't seen that, but that's... Yeah, it's really strange. Okay, so here we go. Now it's working. Definitely working. And now we're getting some nice subsurface glow happening as well, which is good. So I might just go and... I always do this, you know, there's usually something wrong and I crank everything up and then it's not... It's usually just some silly thing that you've done. There we go. So now I've got some nice glowing, inner glowing sort of stuff happening. And it just kind of, it just takes it a little bit out of the ordinary. You don't have that, you know, just perfect diffuse surface stuff happening. You just got some, you know, some really interesting kind of glowing effects. Which, yeah, just kind of helps to make it feel a bit more interesting. So you can play with the scatter distance. The lower it is, the less it will kind of scatter. Which is probably good for this. Yeah, this is a very small bit of geometry with a very small thickness, so it's probably good to have it down. And yeah, you know, we can turn reduce diffuse back on, see if that has any bearing. I don't think we have. We don't have diffuse on anyway. So you could go and add some color in there. I don't know what this will look like, but let's have a look adding some color in there. Ooh, green. I guess the yellow and the blue is mixing to create green, which is kind of interesting effect as well. So maybe we'll do something like that. Let's see what that looks like. So now you should see the effect. If I turn this reduce diffuse intensity, you should see the effect of this coming brighter again. You see that? So sometimes it can be useful to turn that off, I find. Most of the time you want it on, but occasionally, you know, if you're doing something that's a bit kind of out of left field like this is, sometimes it's good to kind of turn it off. Alright, so I'm going to just take this down more. It's a little bit too intense. Still want to be able to see the kind of detail. Like in here, it's a bit too crazy. That looks better. I mean, we're still using this, this skylight, which I probably, would avoid using. I think I would probably replace that with a dome light, or environment light, and just find, and I had another link up here, find another interesting HDRI that's going to provide, a good base lighting scene. And I'd probably do that based on the environment that I'm looking at. So, we've got this mountainous environment, deserty kind of thing that's going on. So, maybe have a look for something like that you can use. Jump back to that. You can search in here as well, so you can do outdoor, or you could try and search by mountains maybe. Let's see, where's the search here? See if we can search by mountains. Whoa! Doesn't work too well. My computer's starting to chug because I'm rendering at the same time. Just stop that. Okay, there's nothing for mountains. That's okay. Let's try desert. Oh, that's not too bad. It's got some mountains in there as well. One thing to look at is these spheres, because that kind of informs you as to what this is going to be in terms of a 3D lighting environment. So I can see it has a sun in it, and it's going to create directional shadows, which is going to be cool. And it's going to give me these mountainous and blue sky reflections. So I usually don't go for the full-on resolution because it is really, really slow to render at these high reses. So especially when I'm testing, I usually stick to either the 2K or even 1K sometimes. Just for speed, because once you get up to this, it just becomes kind of unmanageable. But and there's also not necessarily a huge need to go that high resolution, especially if it's just for light information. It's not really needed to go that high. All right, let's drag this into environment map, and I'm just going to kill the skylight and have a look at the environment light. See what that gives me, and it is a good idea to check the environment light in the viewport as well, because that will kind of inform you as to where it is. Certainly for the sunlight. Oh, let me just that's kind of weird looking. I don't know why it's so blue like that. It's kind of weird. Let's have a look. There we go. So you can see how that's changing the light. It's giving us quite a hot highlight, which is actually kind of interesting. But yeah, so I think the gamma in this viewport actually from the rookies is wacky. That's why it's displaying strangely. But I used the viewport visualization of the light just to determine where the light direction is, so we can see it does actually match what we're seeing in our render. Here's our guy, and our light is kind of coming over here from behind, top down, but a little bit behind him. And you can kind of see that there, where it's casting shadows down. So I think it's better to have, HDRI. Maybe this one isn't necessarily the best one, but you get a nicer quality of lighting than you do from a skylight. Like I said, the skylight colors with this environment map that it creates, they tend to be a little muddy. So I think you get a better kind of crisper and just more varied result with an environment light HDRI map. And then you can still combine that with a sunlight. Although when you're using a sunlight with a HDRI that has a really obvious sun in it, you either want to match that sun or you want to remove that sun from the HDRI so that you're purely just using the HDRI for reflections and ambient lighting. So that would be, taking it into something like Photoshop or Nuke. I might use Nuke to do that as well. And just paint out the sun, and then you will remove that light, that obvious source of light from the HDRI, and then you can place your sunlight wherever you like. So that's definitely something that I might do. I can show you how I would do that. Just give you a quick little demo of how I might do something like that in Nuke. Hopefully my build is still working. Let's see. It's always handy to be able to do that, to clean it out so that you can actually just put a sunlight wherever you like. Let me have a look here. So there we go, that looks better. So there's our sunlight there, and it's actually it's got quite a lot of illumination around it, so it's a bit tricky to clean out. But one thing that you could do is just, if I just use a roto paint node and then choose the clone tool here, and you can control click, it's like the clone stamp in Photoshop, control click and drag out. So the leftmost circle there is where I'm going to be cloning from, and you can see I can paint out that sun. And if I do shift to roll that, and you have opacity and different settings. I'm not doing a great job of it, but you can see how that illumination that's spreading out makes it slightly more challenging because there's an obvious gradient there. So I would be just doing this, just working it over, and then you could always kind of blur that and do some other things to smear that, to blend that back in. You could even replace the sky with something else if you really wanted to go that far. But that now, won't have that bright light in it, that bright sunlight, and it won't create hard shadows. And I can then place my sun wherever I like. So let's see if I can. Another thing that I often do is just blur the whole HDRI, and that can kind of sometimes, just give you a more ambient sort of feeling to your lighting as well. Obviously, it helps me with this problem of the dodgy painting, but that can sometimes help things. So I'm just going to write this out again to probably just write it out to an EXR this time. EXR, HDRI, they're kind of interchangeable because they're both floating points, so they won't be clamped. They have full kind of range for lighting, so that you can expose them up and down. So I'm just going to call this one edit and render one frame. It exceeds 1920 by 1080, which is my non-commercial version, so I'm just going to reformat this, which isn't great, but it'll kind of be okay. Let's go 1920 by 1080. There we go. And now if I jump back in here and just change that one, just drag it in, a bit easier. There you go. You can see my sun is gone now, and you can see that hot reflection is also gone, but I'm still getting the sort of reflections and environmental contribution from that light. And now I can go and place that sun wherever I like, and I do have that sun in the environment, although it is tied to the skylight. So I might just delete both of those and replace that with a distant light. So if I zoom out, maybe I want my sun to be coming from over here or something. Just replace that with a distant light, control click, and let's drag that over here. Let's have a look at that. There we go. So now I can put my sun wherever I like. is there such a thing as fully hand-painted HDRIs in production? That's a good question. Not that I'm aware of, but... Oh, well, look, sometimes you do... You know, I have done painted HDRIs, actually, where I will paint light positions. So just by painting white dots on a, you know, on an image, I can kind of create like a studio lighting environment. If I want lights to come from certain directions, then I can just paint them in, you know, create an aspect that's going to be a 360 degree wrapped image and just paint some dots in where I want lights to happen. I have done that before, but, you know, in terms of hand painted HDRIs, you know, with more complexity, I don't know. I'm not sure. I don't know what, you know, like animation studios do when they want to have sort of HDRI style lighting. I'm not sure if they do anything like that. It would be interesting to see if anyone out there was doing something like that. Maybe you can be the first to try it, Adam. Yeah, I don't know. It would be really interesting to kind of try, you know. I guess the thing with HDRIs is that they have a dynamic range, so that's the thing that you need. You know, you need to have in there so that you can stop them up and stop them down. Yeah, do it. Put some variation in an illustration so that you've got areas of light and dark, and then export it as a floating point image like an EXR, so that you can control the stops and see what you can kind of get out of it. If you sample values in Nuke, for example, if I have a look at this and sample the values, I'm looking here at these value ranges here, and if I put my cursor over the sun, you can see there's a value there in the red channel of 10,858 versus in the sky here it's all, you know, below 1. So this is what is going on in the HDRI, is that these dynamic ranges are creating that lighting environment. So if you could replicate that, you know, the rest of the image can be just regular ranges between 0 and 1, but then maybe you have these hotspots for the lighting areas. That might be really interesting. Love to hear how that works. But yeah, you can see now through the distant light I can control that, but I can still use my environment light purely for reflection, and cranking that up is just going to give me greater ambient contribution and not have that light in there. And then, you know, even though I did a pretty poor job of painting that out, it doesn't really matter as long as we're not using it as a background or anything, or we don't have super crisp reflections on this guy. It doesn't really matter at all that I did a terrible job of painting that out, because I did the main thing that was important, which was removing that really hot spotlight of the sun. And now I can kind of just use that to introduce more blue. And I also get this contribution from the ground as well, which is this kind of yellowy tone. Alistair says, too bad there's no content aware like feature in Nuke. What do you mean by that, Alistair? I'm curious. So yeah, there we go. You know, it's kind of looking alright. I quite like this texture. I mean, I think it could potentially do with a little more work. But I think it's just taken it, you know, from being something kind of a bit mundane to being a little bit more interesting and a little bit, you know, just have a little bit more textural detail. The Photoshop cleaner. It's the Photoshop cleaner. What does that mean, Robert? Sorry, I'm a bit slow today. This head cold is affecting my ability to understand. The one that does clone stamp with whatever is around the area. Oh, I see. Gotcha. I see. So you can kind of... it's more of an automatic thing than just doing the painting like what I was doing. Is that right? Like it's a more kind of... It just automatically fills in something with what's around it. I'd be interested to see how that went with something like a gradient. Is it better blend? Yeah, right. Okay, cool. Well, I mean, yeah, when I would do it in Photoshop as well, I would use a lot more kind of just opaque or semi-opaque brushes rather than this one I just did at full opacity with some hardness on as well. So I'd probably usually do it a bit more gradually with opacity down, so that it's just a more gradual kind of build up, and you can kind of control that a little more. But yeah, if there's any kind of better way of doing that, then that would be great. Oh, you do have blur here as well. You could use the blur. Let's try that. There we go. That's probably what I should have done, just to smooth that stuff out a little bit. But like I said, you don't have to be perfect with it. It's not, unless you're rendering like a chrome ball and you actually want to use this background plate as well, then the goal is just really to remove that sun from the image so that you can get that result by of removing that sunlight. Drawn Skull says, "Hi, can you tell me what a film producer is responsible for?" So a film producer, VFX, or a producer in general, is usually the person that is going to be overseeing the kind of organizational aspect of film production. So they might be yeah, I mean it depends at what level the producer is. So a producer that works in a studio is going to be responsible for kind of managing everything from timelines to what people they have on what jobs and who gets and managing things being done on time and sent to the client. Also, working with the client to work out when things should be delivered, and also being involved in sort of handing out feedback and handing out correspondence from client. But usually it's, they have an idea of the budget and they're trying to make sure that things get done on time and in budget, which invariably they don't. They tend never to be on time or in budget on films, but that's kind of their role. They're sort of more in terms of organizational, I guess, rather than artistic, and just always keeping on top of timelines, things like that. But then you have your producers at the top level, and they're more about the financial side of things, and also trying to sign deals and stuff like that. But the producers that I'm familiar with are the ones in the studios, and they're sort of overseeing the whole project and the organizational aspect of it, from timelines, amount of artists needed. When they're hiring people, a producer is the person that is going to determine how many people they need, based on a lot of factors and a lot of other people's input, but the producer will kind of outline that stuff, and then that triggers off a whole lot of other people to go and find people, and HR have to go out and hire, and recruiters, all that sort of stuff. But the producer is kind of overseeing all those aspects. Means they don't do anything. Yeah, that's right. I think a lot of things are out of their control, but yeah, it's in my experience, films rarely go under budget and on time, although occasionally, and it's a good feeling when they do. So yeah. Anyway, I think we can call this guy done. I just wanted to kind of show you guys some of the processes that I would take in building this stuff up. It certainly helps to split things out when you're working on this stuff, so that you can work on each part independently and make changes. You can see I made that UV transform there on that guy. Yeah, producers do tend to be very stressed because, well, they have a lot of responsibility in terms of trying to make sure that things do run on time. There's a lot of money involved in film production, and it costs the studio money, the VFX studio money, if they start going over time or going beyond the quoted time that they had allotted to something, which frequently happens, underquoting, stuff like that, or just not kind of understanding the brief, or the brief changes, but you don't get paid anymore when it changes. Depends. Sometimes you do, but yeah. Look, I don't think I would want to be a producer. It does seem incredibly stressful. And they always seem to be there. You know, you always think the artists are the ones that are always there, but producers also always seem to be at work, even on the weekends. All right, so I thought what I might do now, so I can help David out, is and you know it'll be beneficial for everyone to see this, is to talk about, you know, we talked about the drool in the Kong shot, but obviously this is a great candidate for it, and they have actually represented it here with some geometry. So I think that's what this is meant to be. These little features here should be drool. So if you were to do that drool type effect, and there's a couple more here, if you were to do that drool type effect on a creature that is moving around a lot, you can see he's moving his mouth around. If I tried to do a fluid simulation from this, stuff would be going everywhere. So one technique that we often use for this sort of thing, and I can think back, you know, the first time that I was introduced to this was on Ghost Rider, and setting Nicolas Cage's head on fire. And sometimes he was riding a motorbike, you know, going really fast through the scene, or moving his head around like a crazy guy that he is. It was really, really hard to get the fire to kind of look like it was burning all the time, because as soon as he moved, the fire would extinguish. So one of the techniques that we used was to actually try and reduce the amount of animation that was happening, or the amount of movement. Try to inverse the animation so that it kind of locks the head in place. And I'll see if I can remember how to do it. We'll see. See if I can do it. So what I'm gonna do is create a I'm actually gonna move this. Let me do this. Let's see if I can remember. I'm going to move this to the center of the world. So I'm actually going to just do it manually. I'm going to move the mouth. Let me go to, we'll make 280 hour. Actually, let's go to the start. Yeah, we'll make 280 our start frame. That'll be okay. And I'm just going to manually position this mouth at world 0, like this. There we go. So this is going to be my kind of reference position. So there's our mouth at world 0. Probably would be better if his mouth was oriented the other way, but that's okay. So now I've got this oriented at world 0. And what am I going to do now? Let me see. The idea is basically that we want to kind of... that's what I want to do. I want to create a point, basically, that represents this object. So maybe I'll slice off his head. That might make it easier. So it doesn't have all this other stuff. Do we have the head as a separate geometry? No. Let me just convert that. I did this just recently, and I'm struggling to remember exactly how I did it. But let me try and remember. If I fail, I'll see if I can pull up the example I made. It was for a different kind of thing, but the idea actually worked quite well. So there we go, beheaded, and transform him there, and that still works, which is great. And now I'm just going to create that's what I'll do. I'll create a point in space like this. So this is going to be at world 0. And then I'm going to point deform that. Rest point lattice, deformed point lattice. So actually I want to do this. Just going to put a time shift down. What sort of character are you doing, David? If you're still here, what sort of character are you working on? So have a look at that. There's our point. There's our head. If we have a look at what our head's doing. There we go. So you can see our head is moving crazily away from the world, and it's moving all over the place. Can you render into QuickTime in Houdini? Rizwan says. Well, no, you can't render directly into QuickTime. And to be honest, I wouldn't render directly into a movie file, because if you have to stop rendering for some reason, or your render like corrupts, then you lose your entire sequence, because you're rendering to a movie file and it has to get to the end before it will compile that into a movie and encode it properly. So yeah, it's not a good idea to render directly into movie files. What you should do is render to frames, render to individual images, and then export them to a QuickTime, which you can do. So you can render, if you go to the out context here, you can render a sequence, and that's going to render individual frames. So you can see this particular frame number is 240. It's rendering EXRs. Then I would bring that into another package like maybe not Nuke. Nuke isn't great for that stuff, but I actually use mplay, Houdini's sort of built-in image viewer. Now let me see if I have anything here. What have I got? Let's see if I've got the Kong shot. So this, here we go. Here's one of the Kong renders that I had from comp. So here I can do file export, QuickTime movie, and I can output a movie that way. That's probably what I would do. So yeah, I don't ever render directly to movies. It's not a great idea in my opinion, because of that reason, that it can crash and you can't stop it once it's started. Otherwise you lose all of your renders. So that's the problem with doing that. EXR or nothing. That's right, Alistair. All right, so let's go back and I'll keep trying to figure this out. So what I've done is I've got my head and I've created a rest frame at 280 because I've established that as my start frame, whatever start frame you want. And I've got this add here, which is creating a point in space, or it's a point at origin, which is world 0. And then I'm point deforming it by the head. So the point deform just has like a radius lookup. It's a point cloud kind of thing. And it is actually going to be moving my point. So if I have a look down here, turn on my point display so you can see it a little clearer, you can see that this is moving about. Now, if I put another transform down here, I've got my crazy moving head, and I reference that point here. Let's try this in here. So I'm going to put point expression, and I'm going to point it to the point deform. Let me just rename this. So I'll put a null here and just call this like head anim. Transform point expression / head anim. There we go. And then the next thing I need is the point number, and there's only one point. I use PC, Rizwan. Yeah, PC in my experience is better for Houdini. I've had quite a number of people tell me about various issues with Macs and Houdini. Certainly UI issues seem to be the biggest problem. But yeah, I've always been a PC person. I don't think Macs are worth it for for computer graphics. workstations that you have to get really high-end stuff, and you just, the money that you have to spend to get a Mac of the same quality is just not worth it. So here I'm putting in the point number, and then the attribute, which is P, because I want to reference the position of that point. And then the last one there is the component. So because this is in the X slot, 0 is the X component of that vector. So I'm going to put that in there. I'll just copy that and change the component to 1 for Y and 2 for Z. And now if I scrub, you'll see I get this like double offset happening. But if I tick on invert transformation, look what happens. Great success. I did it. I wasn't sure if I was going to be able to remember it, but I did. So what I've done, yeah, that's right. That's right, Robert. I just find, you know, for when you get into really high-end PC stuff and this kind of work, it's just the value thing is a big thing for me, and I just can't get the same result or the same value. You know, I can get a much better PC than I can for the same price. So there we go. We've got this now stabilized animation, and it's just at world 0. So I can do all these effects to this now, and certainly the point deformed, the point deformed cloth, the drool effect, would be perfect for this. It does get a bit challenging if I was to add drool to this, for example. So, you know, let's just do something really quickly. I've got a bit of time. I'll just isolate this tongue, and we'll just emit fluid off of this tongue. So what have we got? Is this a solid thing? Yeah. I'm just gonna, I'll just scatter some points on it. And then, hey, cool. Yeah, glad you liked it, Alistair. It's really, really handy because you can see now we've got this guy just kind of, and I don't actually need the head to be isolated, to be honest. It can be the whole thing now. He's just now locked in space, which is great if we're doing any effect. So you can, you know, all I need to do is change how I've positioned this. If I wanted it to be at a different location, for example, if I wanted the claw to be isolated, place the claw at world 0, and then this whole thing just kind of works. So it's really, really handy. So what am I doing here? Oh, I do need that because I've selected the tongue. And yeah, I can't tell you the amount of times that I've done this when we have a character that is moving around or traveling really far in space. You know, just lock him to world 0, do your effect, and then you can actually apply this same inverted animation back onto the effect at the end. That's what I want to show you, because there are some limitations to this effect. So I'm just going to create a very quick and dirty flip sim. So I'm just going to go into a dot network and need a flip object and flip solver, and I'm going to put down a volume source, particles, source particles. I don't have a group, and let's just go first context. Get rid of that path. Let's check our bounds. Okay. So we can probably take that down quite a bit. Oh, that's why we're not seeing anything, because our first frame is 280. There we go. Okay, so guides, particles, turn off sprites, set to particles, add some gravity, and down we go. There we go. Okay, so let me just make a quick little VDB of this guy as well. Polycap. hopefully that works. Video from polygons. How important is to manage Vex when applying for an effects job as a junior? So, look, I think it's important to know a bit of Vex, but it's not the end of the world. I mean, look, every studio is different in terms of what they require from you. And every effects kind of job posting is going to say that you need Vex and you need Python and you need all sorts of junk. But to be honest, it's not the end of the world if you're not, so technical and not so into Vex. I'm not a super technical person. You can see I'm not really, I'm not doing anything with Vex here, and people could do this with Vex, and that's great. But I don't really care for it, and it doesn't affect me at all. I will use Vex when I need to, and I only use it really for very simple things. But occasionally I will need to do something more complicated, and sometimes I need to look things up. But yeah, I think it's important to understand it and to be able to create simple kind of things with Vex, and even just be able to read some and see what's going on so that you can make little modifications. As a junior artist, you're not going to be tasked with creating anything overly complicated anyway, but you might inherit a setup that has some Vex in it, so you would be expected maybe to understand how to change certain things if you need to. But it's not the sort of thing that you absolutely must have. But it does depend on the studio. Some studios are really kind of technical, and their team might be very kind of Vex heavy. In that case, they might want you to have more Vex knowledge than somewhere else. For me, that's always something that can be learnt and taught. It's far more important for me when I'm hiring somebody that they're creative and they have a good eye, because that's something that is very difficult to teach. And I know that I'm going to struggle to teach somebody that, but it's not difficult for me to teach somebody Vex. So for me, that's the most important thing, is that somebody has created some really nice effects on their reel, or the things that they've worked on before look really beautiful. And oops, just remembered I need to use this stabilized version of the head. There we go. So that should be okay. Nice. Yeah. So for me, that's the most important thing. Vex, is something that can come, and I didn't really understand Vex at all, even when I was working on films, for a long time. I know now, and I've learnt a lot over the years. But when I first started using Houdini in films, I didn't understand Vex at all. I didn't understand a lot of Houdini, but I had been working in films for a long time already, so I had that. But yeah, it's not the end of the world if you don't know Vex. And really, I do disagree with people that say that you have to learn it and it's the most important thing in Houdini, because it really isn't. It just isn't. There's no two ways of, there's no better way for me to say that. There are people that I know that have been in film for, 20, 30 years who have only recently switched to Houdini. And they're a far better effects artist or VFX artist than somebody who hasn't been in the industry for very long and they know Vex really well, but just knowing Vex isn't going to necessarily make you a great VFX artist. So I think there's a lot more to consider. I think it's better to be, a much more rounded artist in general. Nuke is a more valuable skill, I see, for a lot of things, so that you can composite your own work and make changes and do things like, like I just did before, where I painted out the HDRI sun. Just knowing how to do things like that, that's more, makes you a much more valuable artist if you have more diverse skills and in different softwares as well. Not that I'm saying you have to go and learn Maya, because I wouldn't do that. Vex is the programming language inside of Houdini Rizwan, and you don't see me use it very often, but it is there. It's used for, you know, setting attributes on things, doing different controls, setting colors, part of complex setups. If you actually have a look at the point deform, you know, it has a bunch of wrangles in here, so you can see what it's doing. And this is how I learnt Vex as well, is just cracking open nodes and seeing how they do things. This is overly complex stuff, and I would struggle to write something like this. But yeah, it's, you know, when you're learning, it's good to kind of look at how they do things in Houdini and see if you can learn from that. And sometimes you can borrow and steal bits and pieces of Vex from places, and that, you know, can be a good way to learn. All right, so we've got this crazy flip sim. And, you know, it's whatever. It's not that great, but that doesn't really matter. In fact, let me just, I'll just do one thing, because it will be infinitely more interesting if I make it viscous. It's like becoming Neo. That's right. Enter the Matrix. Yeah, look, it's definitely powerful. Don't get me wrong. But I just think every tool has a purpose, and some things I can do a lot easier with Vex, and some things I can't. Like, you know, people would do this in Vex if they, you know, were really kind of up with it and they didn't mind typing out all this stuff. But I don't want to spend ages typing stuff out. I just want to create the effect. So I much prefer using the things that are there to do the job that they've been provided for. And if there's something that doesn't exist, then I'll look to create it myself. So yeah. All right. So let's see. I made it maybe too viscous. Let me turn that down. Go 100. Maybe 1,000 was too much. Now, the whole point of this is you may be able to imagine what is going to happen, but when I apply the original transformation back to this, the fluid is going to be transforming as well. So it's something that you need to be really careful with when you're doing these effects, this inverse transformation stuff, is that you don't really want to do it, or you can't necessarily do it on an effect that is flying around like crazy, because it will then receive the motion of the character. So actually now it would be good because it's not actually leaving the body, but that's not what I want to demonstrate, so I'll just turn that down again. Maybe just set the slip scale to 1. So I do want to see it falling down so that I can demonstrate this problem. Sometimes it's not so much of a problem, and that's good, that's fine. But, you know, with smoke, for example, if you've got a fire on a guy's head, like Ghost Rider, and there's a big smoke plume coming off it, and he's doing this, the smoke plume is also going to be kind of moving at the same time, and it looks really unusual and wrong. So you do have to be careful with it. So let's see. Hopefully this is looking cool now. But we'll see once it leaves, then it's going to fall down, and then hopefully we'll be able to see the problem. But certainly for drool, you know, just between teeth and inside the mouth, then that is completely fine. There wouldn't really be a problem there. So yeah, this is kind of going all right. Let's now apply. So I'll do a DOP import to get this back out. DOP import fields. I should probably just take the resolution of that flip down. It'll run a lot faster. Flip object. Choose flip fluid. There we go. And yeah, I might just take the res down, make it run a bit faster. There we go, it's a little better. How are we going for time? Half an hour left. if anyone has any questions or any other stuff to look at, you know, in the last half an hour, let me know. I'll try and finish this off, and then we can talk about something else. I probably won't do this this FX the rookies challenge anymore after you know, after today. But if anyone has any questions about it or any other kind of effects, then please let me know. So I'll merge this back together with our geo here, just so we can see what's going on there. There's some weird kind of stuff going on, I'm not sure. I think that's just kind of weird viscosity stuff that's going on there. Because in here it looks okay. Yeah, not sure what's going on there. It's kind of strange. But now we want to apply it to our original geometry. So we can, let's see if we can get this working. We can take, looks like he ate some glue. Yeah, he's all gummed up. So what do we want to do here? Let's see, try and figure this out again. So we've got our, this is our original transform where we created this offset. So we probably want to apply that to our effect. So now we've got this kind of down here, but if we invert that, that should put it back. So let's just check that. So that would be taking it from here. There we go. So the starting point is correct. So that's good. But now we need to apply this offset to it. So take this transform, place it down here. It gets kind of complicated. I'm going to turn off the invert. Hey, look at that. Wow, it's like I know what I'm doing. I never know, you know, it's been a while since I've done some of these things, so sometimes you're never quite sure how it's going to work out. I guess, you know, it does make sense. So basically what we're doing here is just reapplying these same transforms that we applied up here. So the first one is just doing the inverse of this. So I set that to invert transformation. So it is, instead of moving it down to the origin, it is moving it back from the origin to its original location. But then it's still, at this point, locked in space. So, still locked in space. So we need to apply this offset here, which is that point offset. Where is it? Here it is here. So we need to apply this point offset that we've got. Just zoom out. You can see that. Which is the offset animation from World 0. So when we apply that on top, because we've already moved it, now we're just offsetting it, so you can imagine that path, you know, going down here like that, and then that lines up to our original animation. So I realize that may be a little bit confusing, but you know, you can see it's working, obviously. So I hope that makes sense. It's yeah, it's a cool little trick. Let me know if you try it out and you can't get it working. I can try and help you. Usually as a junior artist, you'll receive files already worked by other artists. Yeah, look, it depends on the studio. I always say that. But it does. It really does depend. At a much larger studio, like, you know, your ILMs and your double negatives, that is usually the case, that a senior artist will have set up an effect and you will be just tasked with running that effect in shots. So you may have to set some things up, but generally the large part of the effect is probably already done for you. It depends on the shot, though. I mean, it depends on the studio. Smaller studios, you may be required to set things up, but the task that you are given might be easier than something that they would give, or it certainly would be easier than something that they would give to a senior. So it might be something like a bullet hit. You know, that's a great one that we usually give to to juniors is things like bullet hits, sparks. They're just simple particle effects, usually maybe a little bit of pyro for bullet hits. But they should be fairly achievable and pretty easy to set up. The thing is, as a junior, you're not just left by yourself without any help. You know, people are checking on you. You must feel free to ask for help as well. If you get stuck, don't feel like you have to know it all, because you don't. You don't have the experience. But you are expected to have a pretty good understanding of the software. You may not understand all of these tricks, you know, things like that thing that I just did. You may not know about all that, and that's completely fine, because these are things that are developed over years and years of working in VFX and coming up with different solutions for different problems. And as a junior, you know, you're working at home by yourself, you will not have encountered most of these things that are production problems. So it's not expected that you know that stuff. But yeah, I mean, typically in larger studios, you just are receiving setups, or you may receive something that's sort of partially set up and you need to finish it off, or yeah, you're given a shot or a bunch of shots to do the same effect in over and over again. And as a junior, that's where you can really shine. If you can prove that you can do those things, those simple effects tasks like sparks and bullet hits, if you can prove that you can do them and you can do them well, then you'll be trusted with greater tasks next time, because hey, that person really excelled and their stuff looked great, you know, let's give them something else. Or maybe they'll say, let's give them all the bullet hits. You know, in that stuff, you should not think, you know, I'm just getting bullet hits, I'm not getting the big destruction sequences, or I'm not doing, you know, Thor crashing through a building or whatever. That is your opportunity to prove that you can do stuff and do it well, no matter what it is. You know, as a senior effects artist, I don't mind doing that stuff. I don't really care what effect it is, because I will put the same amount of care and effort into a bullet hit that I do a destruction. It won't take me as long, you know, but you should put the same level of care into it. And quite often I will just take those because I know that I can smash them out very quickly and get them done. And then there are better shots that other people can be working on, that they don't have to spend time doing this stuff. So yeah, you know, I think it depends. The bigger studios do tend to work that way, where they will just have a setup and you will have to run it. Smaller studios, you might be required to do a little more. Hopefully that helps. So let's have a look. Let's see if we can see the problem. It may not be that bad in this shot, especially with the camera moving around like crazy as well. But if we freeze the camera and just look through the viewport, you can see that as the head is moving, the goo is also translating. So it really doesn't seem to be a massive problem here. Maybe because there's not a lot of horizontal shifts in motion. But let's say he whipped his head like right across here very quickly. All of this would travel with it without deformation. So this trail, in reality, if he did that and we were doing it properly, it would leave a trail that kind of dragged from here, where he was originally, to over here. But because we're doing this inverse transformation trick, the whole thing just moves as in one big line. So you have to be careful about that stuff. And it, you know, sometimes you can get away with it, like in the case of this one, where the camera is kind of crazy and his motion is kind of crazy. It doesn't really seem to matter. I don't think he does a lot of horizontal movement. Does more of the sort of forward motion, which doesn't really matter as much. There is a little trick that you can do, though, to try and help that, is to create a force that mimics the motion. So we've got this point here in space, which is doing the motion. And what we could actually do is create a force from it. So if I create another point in space and leave it at world 0, and then I've got my transforming one here. Let me see if I can do this in Vex. I'll probably mess it up, but I'll give it a go. So I'm going to take my P position, and I'm actually going to say I'm just going to do normals first of all, because normals are nice and easy to visualize, and then I can convert it. So I'm going to say at n equals at p, which is the p position of our add, which is 0, 0, 0. It's at world 0. And I'm going to say at p minus point. So I'm using a point expression again. And I have the point deformed point plugged into the second input of the attribute wrangle. So I can say 1 instead of doing like inverted commas, dot dot slash header anim. I can just say 1 because it's plugged into the second input. These are 0, 1, 2, 3. So 1 is the second input. And then I'm going to grab the P attribute. So if you go back to the open bracket, you get this tooltip, and it does tell you what the arguments are that it's requiring. So geometry, that's the input, string attribute name, and then the point number. So the attribute name is P, and then the point number is 0, because there's only one point, so it's going to be 0. And if we have a look at our normal, I turned on my normals to visualize that, you can see it's actually pointing the opposite direction. So I'm going to swap this around. I'm going to do the point expression first, minus at P, and that will reverse it. And now I have this vector, which is pointing in the direction of my deformed geometry. And I can actually use that as a force. So I could say null out force vector, something like that. And then in here, in a, I don't know, let's just do some vex again, pop wrangle into a particle velocity tab. And I've got inputs here where I can choose second input. I can actually point that to the force vector. And I could say at force plus equals point expression. 1 for the second input again, because I put that in here, input 2. And then I'm going to grab the n, and it's 0.0. And that is now going to put that in the force attribute. So I can also put it directly into V, so we could visualize it. Let me just turn off normals. Let's create a marker for V. Oh, we do have one. That's good. Let me just hide this so that that's gone. And so we've got V at force. Let's do V at V. So we can hopefully prove that it's working then. Let's see if that works. There we go, we've got some velocities happening. That's good. And you see how that's shooting out like that? So it's better to use force because force is a bit more of a gradual effect, but just so I can see it very clearly, I've got this V in here. So now when I have a look at this, see how it's now shooting in the direction that this guy is traveling? But our sim is static. So it's like we've just added that extra little bit of motion to it. And it's a bit crazy. And we can, we can obviously multiply that up or down or invert it. We could do -1 and flip it the other way, which is going to make it actually fly upwards instead. So you can play around with that, inverting the effect so that it goes the opposite way, which might be interesting. But yeah, so you can add this force, so just creating a difference between 0 and wherever that offset point is, create this kind of force. It looks like these are flying out through the back of the container there. Let's see. Oh no, it's just the clipping plane. Let's see, I think that backwards force is a little bit too crazy. Yeah, that's not working. Let's get rid of that -1. We could just reduce it though, 0.5. And we can actually use force instead, so let's do that. So force is a bit more of a gradual type effect. It's going to take place over time. Let's just leave that back like that. And that's a way to get the more of the motion into the scene, so that when you do the reverse transformation and apply the original position to it, it doesn't look so out of place, because it appears to be inheriting that sort of world motion from the animation. So that's another trick that you can do with it. And certainly with smoke, that's something that I've done quite often, just to simulate that sort of movement. But yeah, flip is exactly the same. They're all fluid sims, so definitely it definitely helps. So there we go. Hopefully that's helpful to people when they're doing character effects. It is definitely, I've found it incredibly useful for lots of things. So even doing like jets, Rizwan, you're doing your jets on your land speeder. If your land speeder was moving around like crazy and traveling really far distances, a technique like this would be really useful for just taking the animation out and applying the effect and then reapplying the animation after the fact. I don't know if it's possible to do something like this in Lightwave. I suspect it might be a bit more challenging, but yeah, it's a good technique. We used to do it in 3D Studio Max before the days of Houdini as well. So it's potentially something that you could do in Lightwave if you wanted to. So yeah, I don't know if David's still watching, but hopefully he'll watch this back if he's not, and hopefully he can use that for his effect. Does anyone have any questions before we wrap up? We've got about 10 minutes to go, and I'm just gonna let this simulate and see what it looks like together with the whole body. Yeah, it's working pretty well. Okay. It's good because he spends most of his time off screen, so that helps. Let's see, what else have we got here? What have we got here? Pyro configure bonfire. Let's see what happens when we set his tongue on fire. Why not? No questions here. Oh, cool. Yeah, thanks. Glad to help. I hope that all kind of made sense. And feel free to ask questions anytime about getting a job in the industry or the things that you need to know. I think it's good to have a bit of knowledge of everything in Houdini. So, it's good to touch, for effects anyway, it's good to touch on all the different solvers that you have. Pops and pyro and flip and vellum, rigid bodies. Think about all those things that you see in film visual effects, and it's good to have a bit of general knowledge of all that stuff. The drill came out insane. Yeah, it's pretty crazy. It's not, it wasn't that difficult, just emitting fluid off the tongue. So yeah, I think it's pretty cool. I'm just going to try and set this guy's tongue on fire and see what happens. Let's go volumes for collisions. So with these wrapped up versions of the Pyro Solver, you can do this. You can put down a volume source node. What is it? No, collision source, sorry. Collision source node. It has two inputs, but the Pyro Solver only has one input for collisions, but you can merge the two together. And whoops, like that. There we go. And then on the Pyro Solver itself, set the start frame to 280. Collisions, collision source. Yeah, so that should work. Let's see what we get. I'll just set the voxel size to be quite large. The old flaming tongue. Maybe I'll take that down a little bit. It's interesting. It doesn't really seem to be doing too much. I guess maybe the scale is kind of a bit funny or something. I don't know. Solving flames. Let's crank it all up. The collisions also, actually, maybe that's a good thing to check, is the collision is possibly the voxel size of this is a bit too large. Would this technique work on Vellum Cape Sim or something like Superman fighting? Just a normal Vellum sim would do fine. Yeah, absolutely. That's kind of what I was imagining. You know, with Vellum, that is a perfect candidate for this because you got crazy character animation going on, especially if it's traveling a long distance or moving wildly off, you know, off center. You do want to stabilize your simulation, or you do want to stabilize your animation, because you will just get crazy stuff happening with your cloth. So absolutely it would work for a Vellum Cape Sim. You may want to do something similar to what I showed with the force technique, so that you can add in some of those movement forces to get the cape sort of moving in the right direction. But yeah, totally, why not? You know, you can absolutely do this on any type of effect, and certainly things like cape simulations or cloth simulations in general are a really good you know, a really good thing to use for that. I don't know what's going on here. Density, temperature. There's no fuel going on here, so I don't know what this is using. Maybe they're just shading temperature here. There's no actual combustion. Let me set my cooling rate to be quite low. Yeah, I mean, this technique works for any kind of simulation, so you know, it's not limited to anything. So definitely give it a go. If you're having problems getting a simulation to, you know, to work because of the motion of the animation, then this is the perfect solution to try and fix some of those problems. Yeah, it works for anything. So yeah, there's no real limits to what you can do, but there are those kind of gotchas, like if you've got something that's smoking, then and you reapply that transformation, then the smoke is going to move in a kind of strange way sometimes. But again, it just depends on the effect and what you're trying to do with it. So let's do this. You can see here, just to give you another example, you know, Pyro, as long as I apply those two transforms, the original offset and then that non-inverted point deformed position offset, I can get that, you know, that same effect. And this kind of really isn't giving me what I was hoping for. Perhaps it needs a better offset just off the tongue, just to peak that out slightly so it's not touching the collision object. I don't know what the deal is there. Let's have a look. Oh, there we go. That's a bit better. Cool. So yeah, I mean, that actually doesn't work too bad, but if there was a huge big plume coming off this guy, you would see it moving around like crazy, which yeah, just wouldn't look very good at all. So smoke, emit smoke, let's just crank that up. I don't know if that actually will work because there doesn't seem to be any combustion taking place here. Just gonna crank some things up, see what happens. Why not? If in doubt, crank it up. Get that on a t-shirt. Yeah, so you can kind of see how this is like stuck in space with the head, which maybe it doesn't matter, you know, it's kind of cool in some respects. But if he's moving around like crazy, then yeah, it can kind of look a little weird sometimes. This looks a bit like a train, steam train. Yeah, I mean, try it out and see how it works for you. Yeah, you can kind of see it with the smoke, what I'm talking about, where it sort of moves with him as he moves. You can see that. See how it kind of feels a bit weird. That translation. So that's a case where, you know, something you need to be careful of when you're doing it. But yeah, if you understand that and know the limitations of the technique, then you can, you know, you can use it to great effect. The draw, you can see, didn't really seem to have too much of a problem, but yeah, smoke definitely seems to look quite weird when you see that translation on it. One thing actually that I just remembered is that you can just choose, you know, to remove certain aspects only. So here I've stabilized every vector. I've stabilized X, Y, and Z all the same. But I could just choose to only stabilize X and Z. You can see now the Y animation is still in. Or what if I just stabilize Z and Y? So now I've got this kind of translation that is stabilized back and up and down, but I've got this horizontal motion. So you can choose to only stabilize a particular vector if you want to. Like if we just wanted to stabilize Y, then we could leave just the Y stabilization in there, so it's not moving up and down, but it can move side to side. So you can kind of balance that stuff. You can also multiply this. If we created a channel on this edit parameter interface and just add a float channel here to just under the, I don't know, under here. Well, let's just call that, I don't know, multi. Apply, accept. Here it is here, multi. So it doesn't do anything at the moment. But if I just copy this and do times, paste relative reference, channel multi, now I've got this ability to control the influence of that effect. So where did I do it? I did it to the center one, I think. There it is there. So I have the ability to control the influence now. You can see now I've got half the influence of it. One would be fully locked at world 0. But if I wanted to maintain a little bit of animation in there and just have it be a lot more sort of dulled down, then I can reduce that down, just have 30% of it. If I have it back to 0, then it does the full thing. So you can play around with that as well, which makes it really handy to be able to just go, oh, actually I want a little bit of that influence in there. And that will make for a better realistic simulation as well. And then you just need to make sure that you apply that same offset, whatever it might be, down here in the non-inverted version. So make sure you apply that as a non-inverted version, and then it will just go back to the correct location. So that can be a really cool thing to do as well. If you don't want to completely lock it to 0, but you just want to take a lot of that motion out, that can be a really handy thing. Or also just turn off, you know, only do it on certain vectors. That can be really, 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 really good as well, because it makes for a more dynamic simulation if it's not all completely locked. So anyway, we're out of time, but I hope that was useful. That was a really good, you know, a really good technique for you guys to learn. So you know, I hope that you you know, kind of got something out of that, and hopefully the lighting stuff at the head of the stream was useful as well for some people who might be working on this shot, or you know, you can take those kind of fundamental ideas into any shot. Remember to like and subscribe so that you get notified of the stream every week. I'll be back here next week. I'm not sure what I'll be talking about yet, but probably more Houdini goodness. And if you're interested in learning this stuff, whether you're just interested in learning introduction Houdini, you haven't done any Houdini before, we do offer the introduction course at CG Spectrum. So please go to our website, cgspectrum.edu.au, check that out if you're interested, and feel free to drop us a line if you want to talk about it. We also offer advanced courses as well, but if you're interested in just sort of seeing what Houdini has to offer, then the intro course is a really good one to sort of give you a bit of a taste of all the different solvers and all the techniques before you want to maybe get into the more complicated stuff. So yeah, thanks for joining me, guys. I look forward to seeing you all next week, and I hope you all have a great week.